What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hughes. I apologize for the new Friday episode. I really can't emphasize enough how vastly thrown off my entire schedule was by the ridiculous schedule that Tulane had to go through this last week, where they came out with a victory, but to show for it, we all had pretty much a wash of a day on Friday. I'm sure the team had a deserved day off, but I walked in the door on Friday morning now at this point at 3 a.m. That's pretty absurd in general, but it comes with the territory of playing college football and traveling with the team. What made it hard to swallow was feeling like I had just done so, which we had, getting off the plane that Saturday night to really truncate this week for Tulane against the Charlotte 49ers, where Tulane had never played them before. I didn't know much about them, but what they seemed to be was a team that was clicking on all cylinders and kind of, setting a trap, if you will, where they were able to at least take advantage of the extra day of practice, because they did play at Memphis. But while Tulane was getting on a plane Wednesday, they had a full day of practice at their disposal, and then all of their amenities there on Thursday. Whereas Tulane's in a hotel, they have a ballroom or so to do a walkthrough, but it's 2 days where they're normally practicing that they could not be at all. So Charlotte definitely had the advantage with respect to that, and it looked like a team that was beginning to click on all cylinders going into this game. And as we saw around the American this weekend, no win is a given, especially in this conference, where Memphis, they barely beat Charlotte the week prior, and then they lost to UTSA. But that probably gave Charlotte some deserved confidence going into this game against Tulane. And it was a game that looked like it was in their reach, at least in terms of the scoreboard, to start the first half. But that was one of the most demoralizing starts to a game I've ever experienced. And I frankly, I'm not the head coach. I don't care that it ended in a field goal. If you can sustain a 20-play, 80-yard drive, that drive for Tulane started on the 4-yard line for them. And that really limits what you're able to do in terms of play calling and trying not to get a safety, which they were kind of close to against Rice, where they started with similar field position. They were able to drive 80 yards, and the time of possession was 10 minutes and 58 seconds. That was, it was like, oh, wow, the entire first quarter is gone. And that is exactly how a team that wants to really get out of Dodge should come in and do so, where it's astonishing that Makhi Hughes is able to do what he does. And yeah, the score might have looked better at halftime if Tulane passed it a little more, but it's so demoralizing to be an opposing team. And even if that drive only results in 3 points, you get the ball back for, 2.5 minutes. Tulane they punt, but they hold it for 4 minutes. They had drives lasting over 5 minutes through multiple times in this contest, including a 7-minute drive in the third quarter, which was kind of what Tulane's longest drive this year was. That one was just absurd to start off. When you look at the time of possession, it's the second game this year where Tulane's possessed the ball for over 42 minutes. That means the other team had it for basically a quarter. I think they had 17:59 of possession in this game and about 5 minutes per quarter. That gives a basically 2-to-1 ratio for Tulane throughout this game, and they definitely made the most of it. But you're also considering that, this is a critical stretch for them. You're wanting to win, but how much are you wanting to give away on film? It's all just this kind of dance where you're really just trying to get out of there healthy more than anything. So I was expecting a little more of a vanilla playbook. And it kind of surprised me to see really that the passing game kind of told the tale, at least with the second half. And they kind of got back to stretching the field, using wide receivers off each other, and Darian starting to really sustain some momentum in the air. That was kind of took me surprised by a little bit. Going back to, using Ty Thompson a little bit. I think they had a play where they had an extra lineman in the end zone and Caleb Thomas. So, for it being a short week, Tulane has still put so many things out there and installed so many things up to this point that they were able to really use their arsenal in a really key way in this game. But the amount of third downs they just kept either completing by pass, converting by run, it was really demoralizing to watch in real time because it felt like every time Charlotte was a little close to making a stop, Tulane just kind of booted any hopes they had out the door. And to hold an opposing team to 3 points, that just can't be, overstated enough. And yeah, it might have been an opponent that was struggling on offense. It's an offense that's fared a lot better than that almost against every single opponent that they faced outside of Tulane this season. And you can't use any excuses about, exhaustion, road travel that don't equally apply and then some to Tulane. But for this to be so convincing of a victory that Tulane was able to have their way and then they ended up sitting their quarterback as a result of the pressure, that's panic mode. And to be able to put teams into panic mode in real time, it's kind of fun to watch. And it's a team that I think is going to really feast on the remaining competition for, quite frankly, the rest of the year. What was kind of looking like this giant challenge in Navy, they have looked mortal these last couple of weeks. Memphis has really had some problems. The team that's coming on strong and not ending in victories is Tulane. And that's as good of a position you could ask for after this gauntlet of a road stretch. Now, I've used the phrase fairly often through this season, a tale of two halves. And I think that's told the story of quite a bit of Tulane's games this entire season. But I don't really know if it applies to this matchup, despite the 10-3 start for Tulane ending in a very convincing 34-3 victory against Charlotte. I think there are a lot of things at play there that I really have to point to, especially being someone that has been to pretty much every single day of practice since this team started as a new one back in fall camp up until now, and someone who travels with the team. This game just should not have been played when it was. Any of the concerns that I had when I was looking back at this game, to go back to that reference, all of them can be solved by the answer of this was way too short of a week for 2 back-to-back travel games. And you started to see it in the first half. And then you eventually saw Tulane's talent and will really pull forward in the second half when they were undoubtedly the better team on Thursday night. Just because the score was relatively close in the first half, to me, doesn't change the fact that Tulane dominated this game from start to finish. It just frustrated me that they even had to be out there. Anytime that there's a Thursday night football discussion, I always bring up the article that Richard Sherman wrote for, the NFL Players Association. I highly recommend everyone go seek it out if you haven't already read it. Just the way that it starts by breaking down the practice schedule for a regular NFL week. It really points out how ridiculous it is when you shorten these weeks for these teams. But I just think back to last Saturday, not this one, but the one prior, where Tulane's getting off a plane at like 7:30 p.m. on Saturday night after a track meet in North Texas. It was extremely hot. I could feel that on the sideline. And it was a game where they had to chase down a really small, explosive team and put up a lot of points to show for it. All of the coaches are working on game film as we're getting there. And there was just this feeling of franticism as we were unboarding the buses that we have to all get to work now. Those guys deserved a Sunday off after that matchup. Instead, not only are they there to do an entire practice, they had to fit all of Monday and part of Tuesday's practice into Sunday when they shouldn't have been out there at all. When we get there Monday, my head is barely on straight because we're on Tuesday's practice to start off. And then with about 30 minutes to go, John Summerall tells the team to all go to the sideline and remove their pads. And that's something that doesn't usually happen on any practice for that matter. And I was realizing that we were entering Wednesday's practice there on a Monday. The normal team walkthrough on Thursday happened Tuesday morning. It shows pretty well in the media after that practice. It's really hard to think of questions to ask when you have not seen the team practice really anything whatsoever. I look back to fall camp and how Tulane was preparing for that Thursday night start. They had night practices. They had a Thursday scrimmage to simulate it. And I remember, and it's something that they continued to do all year, but it was right the first week where John Summerall started having the offense wear the color that they were going to wear on the field on Saturday. The idea being, I'm not going to have these guys practice in white jerseys all week and then have a redshirt freshman or any quarterback for that matter go out there and all of a sudden have to switch his mindset on which is he's actually supposed to be completing the pass to. And yeah, obviously you should know your team from the other, but when the games are of seconds, all of those little details matter. And not to really talk that much about what's going on with the Saints with respect to hitting rock bottom and finally needing to make a coaching change. To me, what stuck out in all of the comments about criticism was from the players themselves saying that they felt like the attention to detail wasn't there. If anything, it feels almost a little crazy at times how much the attention to detail is there for this Tulane team. But this is really when it starts to matter on weeks like this week, where you're trying to ask players what they were able to see on film about Charlotte. They only had so much time to watch, implement, and then practice what they were doing. Wednesday, we are on a plane. That is normally following up a full Tuesday's practice where they're going pretty hard. And we're learning quite a bit about what to expect from this team going into the matchup. But it was just ridiculous how little time this team really had. And then you have to sit around and wait all the way until 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, which after all these 11 a.m. starts legitimately felt like it was midnight by the time that game started. And yeah, Tulane looked a little asleep to start off, but I'm not going to really look at that being a symptom of the team and it more so being the symptom of the reason that there was only one other team in the nation that got a schedule like this. And the league's lucky that nothing really that worse happened in that game to Tulane in terms of, really bad injuries here and there. That easily could have happened when you start to see the really wear and tear start to set in for them, where, yes, they had a bye week a few weeks back, but they have since played now 3 very physical contests. And this game to me was the one where it really was clear from start to finish that there was absolutely no question that not only was Tulane going to win the game, but they were going to do so in a convincing manner. Rice really played them down to the wire. And if I took anything away from what I think you could call upsets in the American this weekend with UTSA beating Memphis and Rice beating Navy, it's that absolutely no game is a given. And that's with a full week of game prep and not all the chips stacked against them in the way that Tulane had this Thursday night. But I thought that you saw, their brand of football really shine. But to me, I've been waiting to really give Darian Mensah his flowers, and I think I'm going to award them after that game. When you just look at what he's had to accomplish this season, the wins that they pulled off thus far, they've either been so convincing that it's hard to separate the chicken from the egg kind of thing, and that, the offense was just so much better out there. Looking at these last couple of games, though, if you look back at North Texas, they only attempted 13 passes. That's you probably are expecting a little more out of a passing game at this point, and very quietly, because there weren't any passing touchdowns. And I think that's always what gets remembered, because although he only completed 10 passes against North Texas, Darian threw 3 touchdowns in that time. I thought that you saw him perform a lot better in critical moments in this game. It was tied how many first downs by pass they've had all season, which is 13. They had that against USF and against Kansas State. He completed as many passes as he has all year. It's a career high for him, 21 completions on 29 attempts. They completed, I think that many passes, if not for one less against Kansas State, but this one stuck out. And it was really important the way that Darian Mensah got to that point. I charted how many times he had conversions on 3rd and 4th down in this game. And I have 5 out of the 9 3rd and 4th downs that they have that Darian was successful on by pass. There was other 3rd downs that Makhi Hughes just ran in swimmingly, but Darian Mensah throws a 23-yard pass on 3rd and 8 to Mario Williams as his first completion of this game. It reminded me a lot of his first pass to Mario Williams in the Southeastern season opener, where I think it was also 3rd and 8, and it was a really impressive catch and a really impressive throw. There was a little bit of pocket duress on that play for Darian, and I thought you saw him exercise really good patience and wait for the play to develop, but he wasn't scrambling, just kind of looking around to see who was open. It was clear that he was moving with intent, and for, I think a lack of chemistry that you saw in Rice with some critical drops by Mario Williams, that is completely flipped on its head. But just as reliable has become Keith Brown, who caught half of those passes on 3rd down in addition to Mario Williams. But there were passes on 3rd down for Darian Mensah where he throws a 23-yard pass and a 20-yard pass on 4th down to Mario Williams, a 25-yard 3rd down pass to either Keith Brown or Mario Williams later in the matchup, 87 total yards on those completions on 3rd and 4th down. As the game went on, he continued to get better. his incompletion started the game, but as they got to what ended up being the rushing touchdown drive following the pick six, he completed all 5 passes on that, including that third down conversion. And, they weren't just chunk passes either. He's been using the running backs a little bit more, and he targeted Alex Bauman. I'm inclined to say that, especially for a guy that's working his way back from an injury, that's wearing a brace that clearly seems to have some effect on his athleticism, a fully healthy Alex Bauman sans brace probably catches one of the targets that was thrown his way. There was a little bit of off timing to start this game, but I just am not going to chalk that up to anything more than this just being a mess of a schedule. But I think that when it really came down to it, this was a game where, they were able to hold the ball for 10 minutes to start the first quarter. And then ultimately it kind of faltered in the red zone. Darian almost threw an interception that got dropped, and you saw him grow up a little bit after that. He's been really good at protecting the football at this point, and he took a few sacks in this game, but they are ones that I just continue to say I'm not going to criticize a lot of this game. What was incredibly impressive to me was the will of this offensive line. I mean, you go and look at the block highlights on Twitter right now of, frame by frame, Josh Remicich just pancaking every single player in front of him. I mean, just completely demolishing them to the floor. There's a play where Josh Remicich, they tweeted out that he got first down yardage on how far he pushed this guy back. I mean, you really saw this offensive line blocking for their lives out there, both for the run and the pass. It's ridiculous to say that Makhi Hughes is almost an afterthought at this point, considering, he had 57 carries over the last 5 days. That's just incredibly unnatural for a player. And he did it with ease. And he hit 1,000 yards this year before halftime. That's obscene to have the output that he's had this year and really not seem to show any wear and tear because of it. But what's become interesting to me is a little bit of competition, I'd say, at running back too. That was something that you look back a few weeks ago, and it seemed like Arnold Barnes kind of had that locked up, especially with how he ran against North Texas. He did not run as strongly to me against Charlotte. He also gave a lot to that North Texas game, and I think Makhi Hughes can't really be comparable in terms of what's just absurd endurance at this point. But Shoddy Clayton Johnson, to his credit, really made everyone pay attention to him by the way he really ended this game by just taking it into his hands, quite literally, either by run or by pass. He's always been a really good pass catcher out there, but to see him get involved in the ground game, it does open up a little bit of what you can do with him. You saw a little bit more Ty Thompson than you've seen the last couple of weeks. And I think that's a wrinkle that you're going to see kind of get added back into this offense. But for as fun as the trickeration and all of the fun scheming has been, this to me kind of was, let's just get back to our roots of having our quarterback have a commanding passing game, have us be able to sustain drives both by run and by pass, because you were able to basically just run down North Texas's throats last week. They were doing pretty similarly against Charlotte as well, but you wanted to see them get the passing game more involved. And to me, if you're able to perform like that on 3rd and 4th down, when it really counts, you saw the receivers stepping up to make really good plays, and you saw Darian Mensah just continue to remain incredibly cool for a redshirt freshman, because you look at the other side of the ball where there was a pass rush for Tulane that it's just not comparable to what Darian Mensah had to go up against, but Sean Purdy looked as freshman out there as you can imagine, ended up getting benched midway through the game. What I think Tulane's done a great job of is slowly handing the reins to Darian Mensah and allowing his confidence to grow with it, because it's not a fluke to me that all of a sudden we're in week 10 and he completes the most amount of passes he's completed all year. And he does so in critical moments. And despite none of those ending up in touchdowns, Tulane does not win this game without the play by Darian Mensah. And as a quarterback, that's a trait that you're really looking for. And to me was more important than anything else in this game. And yeah, the 34 points were aided by a defensive touchdown, which I'll get to on that side of the ball. But it just didn't seem like Tulane had any issues outside of the unavoidable, ridiculous schedule that they are now reaping the benefits of very fresh legs this week. I really don't like to get into the business of comparing how one common opponent fared against another common opponent, but I do just want to point to something. Going into this game against Charlotte, when I was doing my research for a very truncated broadcast and game prep and trying to get articles out, I looked at the fact that their last game against Memphis went pretty far down to the wire. And then I decided to just kind of look up those numbers and see how Memphis had kind of fared against the last common opponents for Tulane, with North Texas and Charlotte being kind of that back-to-back slate. And what it was really clear in between the numbers was that Tulane's been a little bit more dominant than these last couple games, I think might have suggested. And I think you're seeing a lot of house of cards fall. I called Memphis 3 kids in a trench coat, which is honestly was my assessment of them when they got picked to win the conference. It just seemed like it was going off of veteran presence, where, yeah, Tulane also has a lot of veterans. They just weren't on the team last year. But the unknowns at this point, to me, are a lot more proven than the rest of this. But to look at what Charlotte's been able to do this year, I have to point it out just to show that the 3 points Tulane held them to really is something to be admired, especially on the short week. They played UNC earlier this year. They lost 38-20. They played Indiana. They lost 52-14. They beat Rice 21-20. And now we're talking about a Rice team that, then went against Tulane and really surprised people with how hard they played. Now is kind of spoiling other people's seasons by beating Navy this last weekend. They beat ECU. I don't know what to make of them, and Tulane's not playing them. They lost 51-17 to Navy. And then, the 33-28 loss to Memphis kind of sticks out because this was a team that seemed like it was starting to trend up, and they had to meet this really tough opponent in Navy. But they were able to kind of start pulling things together against Memphis. And I think Tulane just kind of went in there and said, we are the ones to be feared in this conference, if you ask me. And that all comes down to what they've been able to do on the defensive side of the ball. Fresh legs, to me, are a lot more damaging on defense than they are on offense, especially when you have such a power ground game in a guy like Makhi Hughes, where it's not an offense defined necessarily by speed, if you're talking about wide receivers, but the offense as a whole, this was like a vampire slowly draining out someone's blood, for lack of a better term. The first quarter, it kind of surprised me all of a sudden that it was ending. And as the night kind of dragged on, I really got the point as to why. But this was a team that, this was a game that the defense was really going to have to be tested in this one, because as much as Tulane was able to dominate against North Texas, Makhi Hughes told a lot of the story of that day on the offensive side of the ball, whereas it was a little bit more back and forth on the defensive side against North Texas, just kind of the speed at which they run. But that was a worry a little bit for me going into this game, where, if the two were reversed, I think you'd be in a lot worse spot. But you really had to kind of run a track meet and then come out there and still perform. And you saw a little more off coverage, I think, on some of those plays where they were allowing some gains and then they were really making critical stops when it counted. But to me, the pass rush has come through in just an incredible way. It's unbelievable to look back to pre-conference play, even, let alone to start the year. When we were going into the Ragin' Cajuns game, we really had no idea who was going to be able to do anything at Bandit. And you just felt like you had some guys that really weren't performing up to expectations. Since then, ever since they've entered conference play, they brought Mike Storms back on as a consultant, the karate use of hands. But ever since as well, Greg Gasparato, Landius Wilkerson, John Summerall, they have been continuing to work until they found the winning formula in terms of a rotation. They finally started to break something through here, but also by product of rotating these guys through so many different positions and through so many different combinations at a time, you found way more than one that works. And if you look at how much Tulane rotates on the defensive line throughout a game, it's unsurprising as to why they're able to really clamp things down towards the end of the matchup. I think that the pass rush has come on really strong towards the end of games. And at first, that might have been a criticism of the pass rush because it really hadn't proven itself yet they took 3 quarters of, wearing down another team, but they're also getting worn down in the meantime. And I found it hard to ignore after they kind of did that against the Ragin' Cajuns. And then USF, it was just so dominating. But same with UAB, it was hard to really take anything away from. They really got back to that brand against Rice, where they just absolutely held it down if they needed to. You're also getting a lot of fresh legs across the defense. With that, you're going to get some leaky plays because ultimately there is just a lot of rotation going out there. A lot of guys, Tulane is rotating 3 guys at cornerback pretty regularly. That's not really, it's easier said than done. Having guys out there really getting some time on task and just being able to hold that down is really important. But Tulane has really 3 good corners in Rayshawn Pleasant, Jonathan Edwards, and Micah Robinson, and they're all making plays out there. Rayshon Pleasant, he's become a non-factor on special teams because if I was a team, I would never kick at him either. He had a really good tackle. I think he broke up a pass on third down, but Micah Robinson, when you talk about the secondary, you just saw something click against Rice. And I did a piece with him because it reminded me of what we kind of saw in training camp, which was he looked like a ball hawk, but then the speed of the game and the physicality of it looked like it just took a couple weeks for him to get his head wrapped around it. But when it clicks for guys, the unclicking doesn't really happen that often, especially when you start to see things in the secondary, which we've heard Jack Chinchu start to say. And I think you've seen it more than anyone in Micah Robinson with the way that he has been able to take away the football. And I mean, that pick six that he had, I said it about 3 seconds before he even had the football. Micah Robinson pick six. I mean, he just read that so well. He also had another pass breakup in this game. He had a really important tackle on third down where he made it before the down marker. There were several no gains or 1 or 2 yard gains by the running back where I look up and Rayshon Pleasant or Jalen Geiger, one of the secondary members, is climbing out of a tackle coming down from the third level. That is something that's always been a hallmark of Tulane's defense to me. You saw an injury to Sam Howard in this game. It didn't look to be as serious as it would have looked with him getting carted off midway through the game. That's something you're still trying to figure out and surmise what the availability is like this week. But I said this last week, and I will keep saying it. This is a team that has done so well at testing all of the guys on task, both the veterans and the young guns, that you could lose a key starter at pretty much any position and be able to get through a few game stretch. And I'm not saying that's the case for any of these guys. It just me speaking more to the fact that it's hard to notice sometimes when a player has gone out. Until we saw him on a cart down the field, I really had no idea because they rotate guys in so often, Dixon Agu and Chris Rogers, and they make plays while doing it. There's a payoff in those immediate moments where you see a guy like Javion White back in the Rice game where he had to fill in for Caleb Bransaw at Spear. Yeah, the growing pains happened in real time, and then he forced the fumble that Sam Howard recovered for a touchdown that effectively ended that game. You see that growth in game at so many positions on defense, but they're really just starting to kind of flex, if you will. I mean, again, to hold a team to 3 points, you can say that the Charlotte offense is not a great one. And I'm looking at a team that's still been able to put up a considerable amount of points over the last 2 weeks. But it was just the way that both quarterbacks looked so incredibly uncomfortable at all times. That's what happens when you truly have a pass rush to fear. Just as important to me as the 3 sacks were the 6 quarterback hits that Tulane had in this game. To be able to keep affecting the quarterback like that, and then to be able to possess the ball for as long as you do, it's really the perfect storm to just for terror on a young quarterback's mind of, okay, well, I only have a few seconds to get this off. And if we don't convert and get points on this drive, I quite honestly don't know when we're getting the football back. That is a very demoralizing type of way to win a game. And it's really the only type of way that you can win on a Thursday night to me. They're never good games. They're always ugly, and they often end up being slogs on the ground more often than not. To me, this was as exciting of a matchup as you could ask for, where the defense held them to 3. They added a 5th pick 6, which leads the country, as does their 6 defensive touchdowns. They have 91 points off turnovers this season. This is just, it's pretty ridiculous how much this team has been able to produce and then capitalize off those turnovers. Yeah, they weren't able to do so a few weeks back. You've seen them continue to do so. But to me, you saw a really strong performance from the passing game led by Darian Mensah and real chemistry with his receivers, especially on third down. And you saw a defense just completely stifle any attempts to make this a contest whatsoever. Special teams just continues to be a strong point for Tulane. I don't know what happened on the missed field goal. And, that's something that really can be an issue in some games, but it was just, I can only speak to how over I was that game. And I can only imagine that the players felt the same on the field. It got really cold towards the end of the game. I kind of tweaked a hamstring chasing down Sam Howard. And I realized, and I understand that I'm not a player. They are way better in shape than I am, but I just kind of took off and I realized my legs were really not that recovered from pretty much chasing down both sides of the ball against North Texas on Sunday in that heat. And it was so cold that my muscles were kind of struggling to warm themselves up. Those were games that I hated playing soccer when it was that kind of biting cold towards the end in a cool night, because it's just kind of a recipe for soft tissue injuries. But but I just kind of felt that on my own. And I can only imagine how those guys are starting to feel towards the end of that game. We're out there hosting a post-game show at 11:30 p.m. We got back from this game. I walked in my door at 3 a.m. That's just, we look at student athletes, and the fact that Tulane was able to get through this stretch is a thing in and of itself. And then you think about the fact that, they go to Tulane and they have classes that they had to miss at this point, 2 days of, and then be absolutely exhausted when they rolled into to classes on Friday. It's easier said than done at an institution like Tulane, but just for student athletes in general, as much as the criticism there is of Thursday night football in the NFL, that is all these guys do for a living. And they have professional help at every turn in order to recover and get back. And yeah, they have the amenities at Tulane, but there was not enough physical time between lack thereof days, but then also class tests having to either preempt or then make things up. It really makes what Tulane did that much more impressive. And so you're looking ahead at this game against Temple, and look a little more into that game as this week goes on. But it's clear that Tulane can beat any opponent that is placed in front of them in this conference. And it's clear that every team at this point can't really say the same. So that's pretty much as good of a position as you could ask for after a 34-3 win. All I can do is say they got out of Dodge, and they got out of Dodge and made people look. Yes, they didn't receive enough votes to be ranked inside the top 25. Whatever, the validity of how much people watch games here and there. But Tulane got a lot of eyes on them because of this Thursday night game, and they made the most of it by the end of this matchup. And that's really, that's a win on several facets. And with that, y'all, I will see you on Friday.